How I Met Your Mother is very creative when it comes to how they tell its stories. The show isn't afraid to be ambitious with how they write narratives, as they find their own solutions to allow for more flexibility in order to create inventive ways of writing compared to other TV shows. A key way they stand out is with the use of a narrator who tells these stories. The narrator is an older version of the main character Ted Mosby, telling the story to his kids of how he met their mother. Other than giving the story a purpose for existing, the showrunners maximize this feature, for example, by enhancing the show's comedy, like when older Ted pauses the story to add a joke.
And still, a guy who spends his whole life sitting next to a giant picture of me has no idea who I am.
This isn't my whole life. I'm in a band, and we're gonna make it.
And kids, they did make it. But I'll get to that later. You know what? I'm probably not gonna get to that later. They had one song, it didn't suck, the end.
But more importantly, the use of a narrator can help expand how the showrunners can tell the stories within an episode, and for it to make sense within the context of the show. He can be used as an unreliable narrator, he can lie or exaggerate how certain scenes play out, or he can hide information from the viewer that will be shown later in the episode. An example of How I Met Your Mother's creative storytelling like this would be Season 2's episode Lucky Penny, where Ted and Robin recount events in reverse to figure out why they missed their plane to Chicago, and figure out whose fault it was. Another example would be Season 6's Oh Honey, where the viewer is put into the perspective of Marshall as he plays the role of a detective, receiving calls from different members of the gang while he's staying in Minnesota, where he figures out that both Ted and Zoe have feelings for each other. There are many other examples of this, and I'm sure I'll go over them in the future, but for today I'm looking at Season 7, Episode 15, The Burning Beekeeper. The episode is quite unique, as instead of telling the story in chronological order, they instead tell the story by setting. They explain what happens in one room for 5 minutes, they then go into the next room for that exact same 5 minutes, and then go into the last room and explain what happens there for those 5 minutes. This gives the writers a lot of creativity in how they want the story to be told, and what information they want to reveal in what order. There might be a plotline that gets introduced at the 3-minute mark of the first room, but we don't get the context of how it started until we get into the second or the third room, and as a sitcom there's a lot of comedic potential that can come from this. For me, this is one of the most memorable episodes of the show just because of its creative premise and how they were able to execute it so well without making it confusing to the audience. The episode begins with Marshall, Lily, and her dad, Mickey, talking about their housewarming party that they're planning as Marshall and Lily have just moved to the suburbs. Mickey reveals to the two that he has just taken up beekeeping as a new job, and that there are currently 10,000 bees in the basement. The opening credits roll and we are at the party. Marshall opens the door to Ted and Robin arguing with each other, but the audience don't know why they are fighting. Ted and Robin go to the kitchen to put the kugel they brought in the oven for 5 minutes, and it's hinted that by the end of that 5 minutes, everything will go to shit. Because so much happened in those 5 minutes, Ted decides to tell his kids separately what happened in each room in those 5 minutes, going from the living room to the dining room and then finally the kitchen. The living room opens with Marshall and Lily talking about how well the party is going so far, and how Marshall's relaxing after finally having a night off. But when Marshall's boss, Mr. Coots, comes over, he says that they'll need to be back at work, which Marshall isn't thrilled about. Lily then guides Coots to the vegan food, and after finding out all the vegan spring rolls are gone, he confronts Ted for some reason, and Ted, as well as the viewer, has no idea what he's talking about. But after he sees Robin come out of the kitchen, he decides to play into the character that Coots is describing and argues with him, even wanting to start a fight with Coots.
Are you suggesting fisticuffs? As in with our fists and feet? I'm a kicker.
Obviously meaning something more has happened we haven't seen from Ted and Robin. Lily then directs Coots to the other vegan food. Barney comes into the room stressing and talks to Robin about,
I love my penis, Robin.
Barney, you promise.
I do. I love it.
but we don't know why he's acting this way at the moment. Marshall brings out the Gouda to the living room, which not long after Lily destroys for reasons the audience doesn't know about yet. Lily talks about how the party has been a disaster so far, and to top it off, this section is used to set up a lot of plot points for the episode without resolving or giving a lot of context to why certain things happened the way they did. Now onto the dining room. It opens with Barney eating the spring rolls, which gives us the answer to who ate them all. Barney hits on a girl and she offers to meet him in the guest bedroom in a few minutes. We then see Coots looking for the spring rolls and ask Barney where they have all gone. Barney lies and says Ted ate them all, where Coots would then confront Ted in the living room, giving us the context on how that confrontation started. Lily calls Barney into the kitchen, but she gets stopped by Marshall, who voices his displeasure with going back to work and wants to confront Coots about it. Lily goes off with Barney and Robin comes out of the kitchen, so Marshall asks for assistance to try and prepare for the confrontation in case he gets into a screaming match, where Robin acts a bit out of character, which Marshall picks up on. Barney comes out of the kitchen looking stressed, so now we know Lily says something to make him feel that way. Marshall asks Coots to talk in the kitchen, and Lily and Ted come into the dining room talking about the arguing between him and Coots earlier, until Mickey interrupts them to say the bees have escaped their enclosure, so they are now all loose in the basement. It's also revealed that Mickey also doused his suit in kerosene because the bees supposedly hate the scent of it. Lily talks about how stressful managing the party is to Ted until she sees Marshall bring out the Gouda, which she would then destroy. Marshall goes back and tells Ted that he isn't going back to work anymore, and asks Ted why Robin is acting weirdly. Before Ted could respond, Mickey comes out of the kitchen, and then the person in the beekeeper suit that's on fire runs out of the house, and that concludes the section in the dining room. We got more information and explanations to plot points introduced in the living room, but no direct resolutions to any. Marshall doesn't have to go back to work, but we don't know what the conversation between him and Coots entailed, and we find out that Barney ate all of the spring rolls and blamed it on Ted, which causes the confrontation between him and Coots, but we don't know why Ted had a sudden change of behaviour when he saw Robin, where he started to act more tough. We still don't know why Lily destroyed the Gouda and why Barney is worried about his genitals, but we do get small progressions and clues to as why, and Marshall is concerned about why Robin isn't acting like herself. Now on to the kitchen. We finally get the reason why Robin and Ted were fighting earlier in the episode. Ted is angry at Robin for yelling at an old lady who cut in line as she was going to get the last kugel that they would eventually get. Robin tells Ted that he never stands up for himself and is way too easy to push aside.
Your problem is, anytime you're faced with the least bit of confrontation, you run away.
Oh, I run away from confrontation?
A nice, easily missable joke in this scene is that as Robin was defending herself, she said this.
It's like Sun Tzu wrote in The Art of War, never give up, never surrender.
I was Tim Allen in Galaxy Quest.
Whatever, dude.
And earlier in the episode in the living room, Ted says almost the exact same thing to Lily after his argument with Coots.
Hey, I'm not gonna let that guy push me around. I believe it was Sun Tzu who wrote, never give up, never surrender.
Shut up, Ted.
Okay.
There are a lot of hidden details like this, and there are many I'm leaving out, so I recommend watching this episode and try to identify these secrets because there are plenty of them. Ted leaves the kitchen while Mickey and Barney enter, and we find out the reason why Mickey doused his beekeeper suit in kerosene.
You know that most bees are left-handed?
Do you know that bees hate the smell of kerosene?
I knew that. Jeez, what do you think? This is my first day as a beekeeper?
Is that true about bees and kerosene?
I don't know.
Barney and Lily have the talk from earlier in the dining room. Lily tells Barney that the girl that Barney is planning to sleep with is a psycho and will cut off a certain piece of his anatomy if he doesn't call her again after sleeping with her, giving the reason why Barney was really stressed ever since then. Lily knocks off the Gouda on the table, and before they could pick it up, mice crawl on top of it, also giving us the reason why Lily would ruin the Gouda later. Barney picks it up and places it back on the table. Mickey gets the bottles of wine from the basement just before Marshall and Coots enter the kitchen, where Marshall confronts Coots about going back to work and tells Coots to try and kick back and relax and find a hobby. Coots isn't interested, and Marshall says he's quitting his job and brings out the Gouda as he leaves the kitchen. Mickey suggests to Coots to try beekeeping, which he would end up doing, putting on the beekeeper suit.
Don't know the first thing about bees. You want to know a secret? Neither do I. It's not a secret.
Coots opens the door to the basement until he hears the timer go off for the kugel in the oven, but as he's trying to get it out, the beekeeper suit lights into flames because of the kerosene Mickey put on the suit, and he runs out of the house on fire and dives into the snow to extinguish the flames. As Marshall checks on him, Coots expresses how fun and how alive he felt while being on fire and finds the importance of what having fun and taking time off does to you, and tells Marshall that they'll take the night off. Ted and Robin make up from their argument, saying that there's no harm in inviting confrontation or fleeing from it. As Marshall goes back into the house, he sees that bees are everywhere as Coots left the door to the basement open and all of them have escaped into the house. In a gag at the end of the episode, after Barney has finished sleeping with Lily and Marshall's neighbour, he decides that staying in the bed with her is worse than getting stung by bees. There is no episode of television I've ever seen that is quite like this one, and there's a reason why that's the case. Writing and constructing this story concept is very complicated. You need to make sure that the audience is able to understand what is going on and to make sure you don't confuse them or overload them with information that they need to remember. You also have to write a compelling narrative that complements this style of storytelling, and you have to give this type of storytelling a purpose for existing and not just doing it for the sake of doing it. And in my opinion, this episode achieves all of that to create a really memorable episode of television. The writing is clear and easy to understand and works well with how the episode is constructed. And the reason why the episode is split this way is because older Ted, the narrator, says that so much happened the only way for it to make sense is if the story is split into these 3 different parts. My personal favourite way they use this style of storytelling is with the Marshall and Coots storyline. Marshall isn't happy about working all the time, so he confronts Coots about it in the kitchen, and after, he tells Ted that he didn't have to go back to work. As a viewer, you would assume that would be because he persuaded Coots to take the night off, but when we get to the kitchen section, it's revealed that he quits his job. It's a really well executed plot twist that can only be done this effectively with the use of this storytelling method. This is also a very rewatchable episode because watching this episode again, knowing how everything plays out, provides a different type of enjoyment and makes you see the episode in a different way. And this is also because there are a lot of hidden details that people won't see on their initial viewing. And there are certain gags that you won't understand unless you've already watched the episode once, which doesn't really appear in sitcoms that much. The writers could have easily told this story in a more standard way and in chronological order with a few changes. But I really appreciate the writers for being ambitious and taking a risk with this type of storytelling, and I think that's a big reason why I appreciate this show after all these years. Sitcoms usually go with a more safe approach of writing episodes and do not stray away from traditional narratives. But How I Met Your Mother constantly tries new things and pushes the boundaries of how stories can be told in a sitcom, and I think that's what gets lost when people look back on the show. The episodes of the show that challenge the way we usually tell stories are the ones that are most memorable and enjoyable for me, and the Burning Beekeeper is the most ambitious with its concept. Rewatching this episode for myself and analysing every detail was a great experience as a big fan of the show. The way it was written, directed, and edited was executed so well, and I'm shocked that the episode came out as good as it did with all of the different elements at play, and my appreciation for the whole team that made this show has grown even more. There were details and jokes from this episode that I didn't pick up on until analysing it, and it's a shame that this episode doesn't get talked about enough not just as an episode of How I Met Your Mother, but as an episode of television. There are episodes that are funnier, and episodes that are more emotional, but when it comes to writing and the narrative, this episode is truly one of a kind.